So we're going to go here into API Gateway and add in a file called deploy.env. And inside of this file here, this one you also don't want to commit. We're going to do application name. And this one's going to be API Gateway like that. We're going to do AWS access key ID, and we're going to copy in the one from Terraform. So just go to Terraform TF-vars, grab this same ID there, and then AWS access key secret is equal to, and we grab this part here, and we paste that there, and we do code deploy, deployment group name is equal to prod. Now, before we continue, I want to show you what this file actually does. So inside of node deploy here, you notice that we have a couple M's here. Specifically, we have access key ID. So we have application name, access key ID, access key secret, and we also do code deploy, deployment group name. So those are the four we have, and we've specified all four of them inside of this one here, which is really important, and we're going to do the same thing for the other ones here as well. So let's grab this deploy.env and put it into listings service. Simply rename this to listings service here. And let's copy this, and let's also put it into users service. So right click, new file, deploy.env, paste that in here. This one becomes users service. So now we have that same file in all three, and we have deploy.env set up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add in some AWS code deploy specific files, which will allow us to build and get this thing running on the server. So the first thing we're going to do is create a file here, right click, new file, call this one appspec.yaml. So this is the file I was referring to earlier inside of node deploy. So here you see that we unlink this file at the very bottom. We do a copy of the file into the root as well, the root of the microservices demo. So now we're going to write this file up, and I'll probably explain a bit more of how this works in just a second. So now for this file here at the very top, I remind myself that this will be moved into the root directory. Now this is important to remember as we go along, and you'll see why that is the case. So we do version is 0, OS is Linux like that, files, and we have a source. And destination is going to be /opt/microservices demo. So basically, the // here means that we're going to copy the whole of microservices demo, because remember, this is in the root directory. And we're going to put it into /opt/microservices demo on our EC2 container. So now for our hooks, we're going to have some hooks in here, and this is all from the code deploy documentation. Well, it's derived from that, so you can have a look at that for more information. We got before install here. And this one's going to have a location. It's going to be API gateway /AWS /code deploy / before install 0_ stop existing process.sh. Timeout is going to be 300, and we're going to run this one as the root. So now this one here is a little bit weird, but what we're going to do is inside of our API gateway directory, we're going to have an AWS directory, inside of which we're going to have code deploy, inside of which we're going to have before install, inside of which we're going to have this file. So we haven't created that yet, but we're going to leave this one here. And underneath here, let's actually just grab that. Also in before install, this one we're going to call 1 because we run it afterwards, so it's just a naming convention. And we're going to write remove previous installation.sh. And this one we're going to run as EC2 user. So basically we try to run as EC2 user where we can, but in some cases we need to run it as the root, and I'll explain to you why in just a second. So now let's grab these two and let's do after install here as well. And let's do location, API gateway, AWS code deploy after install, 0 change permissions. .sh, timeout 300 as well, and then this one's going to run as the root. Location, API gateway, AWS code deploy after install, and then 1 install packages.sh, and timeout is 300, run as EC2 user. Location, API gateway, AWS code deploy after install 2 build bundle.sh, timeout 300, run as EC2 user. And then finally, we're going to do application start. We're going to do here, location, API gateway, AWS code deploy, application start.sh. It's going to be timeout 300 and run as root. So now we have all of this inside of here. We're going to actually create these files. So let's go into our API gateway here, right click, new file, and we're going to create AWS /code deploy /before install /0_ stop existing and then process.sh. So inside of this file here, we're going to start off by writing bin sh at the top like that, and we're going to add in a bash variable. So deployment dir is going to be opt microservices demo and then API gateway. Now this bit of code here, we're going to basically check if the deployment dir exists, and we're going to check if it is a directory. So basically, if it doesn't exist, then we don't need to do the rest of this code. But this is what we're doing here: deployment dir, and then if it is, then we go into that directory. So cd opt microservices demo API gateway. You can actually just write deployment dir here. And then we have to do node-e single quotes try require child process dot exec sync pm2 stop API gateway this, that, and then catch e like so. Now the reason we have to do this is incredibly stupid, but basically this will pm2 stop API gateway will throw an error if it cannot find the process, and if it throws an error, then code deploy breaks on us. So what we do is we wrap it in a try and we run it with node. So basically that if it does catch have an error, then we just kind of just shove the error under the carpet and we don't really care about it. So that's what we're doing here inside of this file. And now let's go into here again, and then right click new file, remove previous installation.sh. And for this file, we do a very similar thing to this. So we're going to go back into that directory and we are going to actually remove everything. So firstly, if this directory exists, we're going to check this directory, the main microservices demo. And if it exists, we are going to remove it. So rm/rf deployment dir like that. I'm going to remove the whole thing there. So we have before install. Now let's create after install. After install zero change permissions.sh. So new file, after install zero change permissions.sh. And now for this file, what we're going to do is by default, the files that are downloaded from code deploy, basically our deployment bundle, is going to be owned by the root, but we don't want that. We want it to be owned by the EC2 user, like that. So we're going to do a chown, which makes it owned. Every file inside of there owned by EC2 user for the microservices demo. So we have this file here, and now let's add in new file one_install packages.sh. And we do this as well. So bin sh like that, cd opt microservices demo, and then API gateway. And we're going to move production.env. We're going to rename it to .env. Now we're going to create that file in just a second. We're also going to run yarn here to install the packages. So now we go here, right click new file, and let's create a file called .production.env. So the point of this file is to specify the envs once it gets deployed on the server. You'll remember that inside of Docker Compose here, we actually have our environment variables. So what we want to do is for production, we can't use Docker Compose, so we have to write it inside of here. So now for this file here, we're going to write listings service URI is equal to HTTP 10.0.1.5. And for the users service URI, we want to do 10.0.1.6. Now this is a port 80 by default. HTTP is port 80. And the reason we do these two is because inside of listings service here, you notice that our private IP is 10.0.1.5. And for users service, the private IP is 10.0.1.6, which is why we write that here. So this essentially allows us to kind of have that same type of connection. So you notice that even though we did a lot of stuff in this deployment series, working with Terraform and all that kind of stuff, we actually didn't really change the actual Node.js code that much. So that's really important to remember, is that your infrastructure should not dictate your actual functionality like your code, but your infrastructure should always support the code that you have. In certain cases where your code is badly designed, obviously that shouldn't be the case, but where your code is designed well, then your infrastructure should support that. So that's why we have this here, and that's why we did a refactor to use these envs. Anyways, so now we have this file and we have this one written up. We're going to add in a build bundle. So build bundle.sh. And for this one here, we're going to do a bin sh like that. And then cd opt microservices demo API gateway. So we're going to go and do yarn build, which will create the dist bundle for us. And then now we're going to create the final file, which is application start.sh in the main directory here. And inside of this file, we're going to do go back into there. So microservices demo API gateway, and we're going to do pm2 start. Now you notice that application start.sh is actually run as the root. Now the reason we run this as root and the reason we run this one as root is because this one stops the existing process and this one runs it. Why do we do both of them as root? Is because when you have a process that wants to use a port that is less than or equal to 1024, if it wants to use, say, port 80, which is the default HTTP port, it has to be run as the super user, has to be run as a root, which is why we run our whole program using root, which is why we had to earlier on do all of this essentially like do all these sudo ln-s, add in all these symlinks for the root user, because the root user needs access to yarn and pm2 and node and npm. If it doesn't have access to those, then it can't do all this stuff here. So we have all of this here now, and we are going to create a file inside of API gateway called ecosystem.config.js. Now this one is going to be for pm2, and we're going to write inside of here apps like that, and then curly braces. Name is going to be API gateway. Script is going to be dist/bundle.js, and then the end is going to be port 80, node env is going to be production. So these are the environment variables we pass into it, in addition to the stuff inside production.env. But in order for it to read the stuff here, and remember that this file gets renamed to .env inside of here, it gets renamed to .env, we have to go into src here, go to index.js, and we're going to add in import.env/config, and that will import .env if that file exists. So now to use that, we haven't included it as a dependency, so let's add that in. So let's go to API gateway, yarn, add .env, and we're going to add that file in. So now we've got a deploy.env.production.env, we've got app spec, we've got the ecosystem, we've got webpack all set up, and we have the code deploy stuff up here. So there's only one thing left to do here, which is inside of dev dependencies, we're going to add in node deploy, and we're going to make this go to /node-deploy. So now this line here is basically 90% of the reason why when we deploy the whole monorepo. So we actually grab the whole thing and we upload it. And the reason for that is because if you don't do that, then this will give us an error. When we try to yarn, it won't be able to find this and it'll give us an error. Now that's 90% of the reason. But the other 10% is that in the future, in this case here, we don't have any kind of shared modules, like a shared directory or anything. But for a professional project, there's generally a lot of code reuse. And that comes in the form of internal modules. Let's say in your monorepo, you might have a shared directory, which contains a lot of shared code. Now this might be stuff that you want to use you might use in different services, and in order to access that, when you deploy, you have to deploy the whole thing. So that's why we do the whole deployment here. In app spec, we kind of grab the whole thing. We don't just grab a subdirectory. Same thing inside of node deploy, we grab the whole thing, not just a single directory. But the reason that we move this file into the root directory is because, like I said, AWS has a lot of features, but it's very, very finicky. And one of the things is you can't put appspec.yaml anywhere other than the root directory. So you have to put it in the root. And the only way we can do that is with a deployment script, because we have multiple ones here. So anyways, that's why all of this stuff is done the way it is. Now that we have this here, I'm just going to run yarn in here again. And we're going to add in a deploy script. So go here, do deploy, and we're going to do node-deploy, and then pwd like that. Now what it's done is it's actually copied this one into node modules. So inside of node modules here, we have, if you go down a little bit, we have node deploy under node deploy here, and it copied in all the code, but we don't actually want to do that. We want to be able to symlink it. So let's open up a new terminal here, and let's go to node deploy. And let's write in yarn link. And then inside of here, inside of the API gateway, we're going to add in a script here. So the script is going to be called link all, and we're going to do yarn link node deploy. So now that we've done that, if we run yarn link all here, what we'll actually do is it will include that as a symlink. And the benefit of that is that it will actually run using this directory here. So if we make any changes, then we can use the latest version. So that's why we have this line here. Now let's try yarn deploy, and hopefully everything works just fine. Although I'm not really surprised if it breaks, and there you go, it broke. So the reason this one broke is because inside of node deploy in index.js here, if we check the permissions for that file, we do ls-l, you notice that it does not have an X on there, which means it's not executable. So all we need to do is do chmod +X, which makes it executable for that file. And we need to do that in order to get this bin script working. So now that we've done that, let's try this one more time. And it's deploying in 3 seconds. It's going to run through that whole process, hopefully. So checking log file, we have our log file here as well. App spec is here. It did the upload, did the deployment. It's on code deploy, it's cleaning up, everything is done. It seems to be working well. Let's go to Google Chrome. Let's go services now and hurry up, and let's go to code deploy real quick, and let's see our deployment in progress, and hopefully it's all working just fine. So we have our deployment here. It's in progress at the moment. We can click on it and have a look. And go down here, we can view events and see which event it's up to. It's currently all pending, which is generally not a good sign because it means that something's probably gone wrong in terms of permissions, but we'll have to see if there's actually errors. So this is the error that my script currently gives. I just did the installation process and I get an error from after install here. And the error says that there's no such file or directory for API gateway for production env. I'm not too sure why this would be the case. Let's go into the file here. So install packages over here. It's just because we need to put a space there. Seems like that's the only problem. So now let's try to yarn deploy one more time and see if this time it works. And now this time it failed at before install. So it seems that the processor namespace API gateway was not found and that somehow it gave us an error. So it seems that if we go into here, okay, so the solution here is instead of having that complicated Node stuff before, I did a little bit of research and it seems like the easiest way is simply to add this onto the end, and this prevents us from getting an error code returned. And when we have an error code returned, code deploy gives you an error. So this is the easiest way to do that. Previous installation, this one here is still fine, so we don't have to worry about that. And now we should be able to do yarn deploy one more time, and this time it should work. So it seems like we failed again, and the reason is because I tried to remove Microservices demo, but we can't remove that. And the reason we can't remove that is because this one was created by root, and we're trying to remove it as an EC2 user. So I think the solution here is to simply run this one as root, because then we can properly remove the directory to only recreate it afterwards. So now we do that, and then we go here, run yarn deploy again. Before I do that, let me just quickly explain, I guess, this part here, which is we have before install, and then between before install and after install comes install. So install is when the thing actually gets moved from the wherever it is, the temporary directory, to the destination. So that moving process is essentially in the middle here. So we want to delete everything before we do that, and then we move it in. So we're going to do this part here and yarn deploy again. Okay, great. So everything actually succeeded, which means that now it's actually deployed properly onto the API gateway, which is really, really cool. We can have a look at that real quick simply by going over here to EC2. And inside of EC2 here, we're just going to go to instances, and we're going to grab the API gateway, which has this IP address here. So I'm going to grab that IP and copy that, and we want to try go to it, and we should get this error. And if you get this error, it means that yours is working properly. If we